The Romans were one of the most important ancient civilization societies that still affect our society on our world today. Their faith, culture, and rules can be seen and felt everywhere. But this doesn't mean that everything the Romans did was right. The Colosseum roars, the gladiators fight. We all know about Rome's great wars. But what if I told you the real surprise is outside the arena? It is said that ancient Rome is where Western culture began. However, it also had a lot of strange customs. Prepare to be shocked and amazed by the strange side of this powerful society. It had everything from stomach-churning beauty routines to death matches like you've never seen before. From using lead-based makeup and punishing animals in criminal court to death by rooster, each find on our list promises to leave you flabbergasted. So buckle up and get ready to see the top 15 bizarre things that ancient Romans did, because the number 1 spot on our countdown promises to blow your mind. Number 15. The teenage emperor married to the moon goddess. His real name was Varius Avitus Bassianus, and he became Emperor Elagabalus in 218 AD. He was only 14 or 15 years old at the time. He was emperor for a short time, but it was a rough one because of his strange behavior, lack of respect for Roman culture, and extravagant spending. One of the most interesting things about Elagabalus's rule was his dedication to Elagabal, who was also known as Sol Invictus, or the Invincible Sun. He thought that Elagabal was the most important god in the Roman universe. In Elagabalus's home country of Syria, Elagabal was worshipped as a sun god, and the emperor wanted to raise the god's standing across the kingdom. In a bold move, Elagabalus imported worship of Elagabal from Syria to Rome, intending to make him the most important god in the Roman government. To bring something tangible of this god to the Roman people, Elagabalus moved a holy stone connected to the worship of the sun god from Emesa, Syria to Rome. There he built a temple to Elagabal on the Palatine Hill, which is one of Rome's 7 hills. People thought this holy stone was an asteroid from the heavens, and Elagabalus adored it very much. It became the center of all of his religious events. Strangely, according to Elagabalus's religion, he was said to be the human husband and agent of Cybele, the moon goddess. At the age of 14 or 15, Elagabalus married Cybele to the holy stone of Elagabal as a sign of his divine link and to strengthen his power as ruler and high priest of the imperial cult. Beyond his religious zeal, Elagabalus was also known for living a lavish lifestyle. He was known for throwing wild parties and dinners where he didn't skimp on anything. At these feasts, guests were shown off their wealth and extravagance by being sprayed with flower petals and perfumes while lying down on fancy chairs. Elagabalus would sometimes go so far as to let wild animals like lions into the dining hall to entertain his guests. Many people in Rome, including the Senate elite and the common people, didn't like Elagabalus's extravagant shows of wealth and strange religious practices. They thought he was scandalous and disrespectful. His rule was marked by political uncertainty, scheming, and resistance. He was killed in 222 AD, when he was only 18 or 19 years old, ending his short and controversial rule. Number 14. Hang out with the cool kids. Socialize while you poop. In ancient Rome, latrines or public toilets were an important part of daily life, especially in cities and other big towns. These bathrooms were public spaces where people could go to the toilet and talk to each other at the same time. In ancient Rome, public bathrooms were usually long, narrow buildings or rows of stalls. The buildings had different styles, but most of them had stone chairs or platforms with seats that had many holes cut into them. The toilet seats were in these holes, which were set up over a trench or channel that took waste away. In Roman public bathrooms, privacy wasn't important. Instead of having their own spaces or walls between seats, people would sit on the bench next to each other, often very close. Because of this setup, people didn't have much privacy while taking care of their bodies. Even lacking in privacy, public toilets were busy places where people from all walks of life would meet. People talked, spread rumors, and even did business while using the facilities. When people were sitting on the toilet bench, they would often start talking to strangers or share news and information. Roman public bathrooms were shared, but cleanliness standards were pretty high compared to those of other ancient cultures. A lot of latrines had water lines or washing systems that were meant to get rid of trash and keep the bathrooms clean. Romans also carried personal hygiene things like tessoria, which were sponges on sticks, to clean their privates after elimination. Number 13. Makeup that will kill you. In ancient Rome, having pale skin was seen as a sign of beauty and wealth. Roman women used makeup, which was often made from different materials, such as lead, to get the look they wanted. Roman women liked to use lead-based makeup, like cerussa, also called white lead, to make their skin look fair and pale. A fine powder of lead was mixed with oils or animal fats to make a paste or cream that was used to make cerussa. After that, this cream would be put on the face to make it look smooth and pale. But while lead-based makeup did create a smooth and white complexion, it was also very bad for your health. Lead is very dangerous, and it can get into the body through the skin and build up over time. Lead poisoning can happen after being exposed to it for a long time. Symptoms would have ranged from intestinal pain to brain damage, including memory loss and convulsions. Ironically, lead also caused skin irritation, and thicker layers of makeup had to be applied to cover the irritation that it caused. Prolonged lead exposure also likely caused reproductive difficulties such as miscarriages and infertility, and possibly lost teeth and emotional instability. Roman women kept using makeup with lead in it even though they knew it was bad for their health because of social pressures and beauty standards. Concerns about possible health effects were often less important than the desire to fit in with traditional ideas of beauty. At the time, people didn't fully understand how dangerous lead was. So many women may not have known that this makeup was harmful. It's important to note that ancient Rome wasn't the only place where people used lead-based makeup. Similar practices were seen in ancient Greece and Egypt too. A lot of people in ancient Rome used lead-based makeup though, which shows how far people would go to be beautiful, even if it meant destroying their health. Number 12. Genderbending to fool evil spirits. In ancient Rome, people dressed as different genders during certain events because they thought it would keep bad forces away and keep children safe. This story shows how the Romans believed in spiritual forces and used rituals to try to make these forces happy or confused. Roman parents would dress their boys in girls' clothes for certain holidays or events to keep them safe. It's possible that this practice wasn't meant to question gender roles or norms. It was just a practical way to keep kids safe from evil spirits. People did this because they thought that bad spirits might target young boys, especially when they were happy or weakened. Parents dressed boys in girls' clothes to confuse these spirits and make it harder for them to find and harm the people they were meant to hurt. Another possibility is that cross-dressing was seen as a way for the boys to hide or fit in with their surroundings and keep bad things from finding them. In a culture where magic and faith in the supernatural were common, these kinds of practices were seen as very important for keeping kids safe. Number 11. An emperor who proclaimed himself a god. Roman faith and politics had a lot to do with worshipping the emperor, especially when the empire was at its strongest. The reason for this was that people thought the ruler was holy and could connect them to the gods. It was common for rulers to be worshipped as gods after they died. But Emperor Caligula took this to a whole new level in the early 1st century AD. The Emperor Tiberius died in 37 AD, and his son Caligula ascended to the throne. His full name was Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, the great-grandson of the one and only Julius Caesar. At the start of his rule, Caligula showed signs of being a haughty egotist who wanted power and praise for himself. He quickly started to expect worship and respect from his people on a level that had never been seen before. Caligula's claim that he was a god while he was still living is one of the most well-known cases of him elevating himself. He wanted to be worshipped as a god, which was against Roman custom, which was to only worship rulers after they died. He demanded that his people call him by names normally used by gods and worship him in special ways. Caligula did many things that made his claimed godhood stand out in order to make himself seem even more important. It was his order that statues of himself be put in churches next to statues of standard Roman gods like Mars and Jupiter. This action not only showed how cocky he was, but it also weakened the power of religious beliefs that were long held. In addition, his desire for worship went beyond the borders of Rome. He thought that people throughout the Roman Empire should worship him as a god and give offerings and prayers to him. If Romans didn't do what he said, they could face harsh punishments like jail time, being sent away, or even being executed. Caligula's deeds caused a lot of trouble and disagreement among both the Roman leaders and the common people. Many people thought that his worship of himself was blasphemous and outrageous, and his cruel rule led to people working together to get rid of him. In 41 AD, members of the Praetorian Guard killed Caligula, putting an end to his violently short rule. Number 10. Invoking religion to prevent the evil of tripping. The Romans had a strong belief in omens and how important it was to avoid bad luck. People in ancient Rome thought that stumbling wasn't just a bad accident, but a message from the gods or spirits. People thought that tripping could bring bad energy or evil powers into their lives. Since this was the case, tripping while crossing the doorway into a house was seen as a bad sign that something bad would happen to the person or the family. To deal with this threat, the Romans created practices that were meant to protect people from the bad things that might happen if they stumbled. In one of these rituals, people would pause right after tripping and make a certain motion to ask God to protect them. Most of the time, this was done by making the sign of the cross, which was popular in Roman paganism before Christianity spread. By making this symbolic move, people hoped to make the gods or spirits happy and protect themselves from any harm that might come from falling. A lot of people in ancient Rome thought that practices and actions could change the future. Many people thought that by doing these things, they could control the magical world to their benefit and keep themselves safe and healthy. This means that making the sign of the cross after tripping was both a personal act of prayer and a way for everyone to acknowledge how superstitions affect everyday life. Number 9. Animals put on trial for breaking the law. In ancient Rome, animal trials were an odd part of the law and social norms. We might think these cases are silly now, but the Romans did not. They saw them as a serious way to deal with problems like public safety, property damage, and even divine justice. People thought that animals, like people, had free will and could be held responsible for their deeds, which led to the idea of putting animals through trials. If an animal was accused of a crime, usually damage to farms or harm to people, it would be brought before a court to find out if it was guilty or not. These cases were not run the same way as trials with people. Instead, they often followed a streamlined version of the court process. People who saw what happened would be asked to witness, and proof would be shown to back the animal's charges. In some cases, the animal that was being accused would have a human defender present at the court hearing to explain its case. If the animal was found guilty, the sentence might be different based on how bad the crime was and how the judges felt about it. People who committed crimes were often sent away from the place where the crime happened, killed by drowning, hanging, or beating, or even made to work. In the 2nd century BC, Marcus Atilius Regulus, a Roman governor, is said to have put a group of rats on trial for ruining crops in the province of Sardinia. This is one of the most famous examples of an animal trial in ancient Rome. Historical records say that Regulus put the rats to death by drowning them in the sea because he thought that would scare off other rats. Number 8. The Music Olympics. Emperor Nero ruled Rome from 54 AD to 68 AD. He was known for living a lavish life, acting erratically, and having a strong love for the arts, especially music and theater. Nero was so crazy about music that he would often forget about his duties as ruler to go to concerts and competitions. In Nero's mind, he was both a great supporter of the arts and a great entertainer. People knew that he could sing, play the lyre, and even act in plays. His shows were expensive, and the sets and outfits he wore were often very fancy. One of the best-known stories about Nero's love of music is about him competing in the Olympics. A story says that Nero wanted to compete in the Olympics, but not in sports, but in music competitions. The ancient Olympics during the Romans' time period not only included sporting events such as races, but also included musical events and theatrical events which Nero himself participated in. But in order to compete in the Olympics, players had to also do well in other sports. Nero supposedly insisted on joining the chariot race even though he wasn't good at driving a carriage and wasn't sporty, just so he could get into the singing events. Nero did a lot of music training to get ready for the Olympics, and he hired a group of skilled musicians and coaches to help him get better. When the competitions came around, Nero allegedly paid off the judges and changed the rules to make sure he won the singing challenges. By competing in and winning the singing events after the Olympics, Nero showed how expensive and self-indulgent he was. He took advantage of his power and status to get what he wanted, even if it meant breaking rules and standards. There is a lot of information about Nero's love of music and the arts, but history stories of his life often mix fact and myth. Number 7. Dr. Fish. Pythagoras was obsessed. Fish therapy, also called ichthyotherapy, fish pedicures, fish spas, or Dr. Fish, became popular among rich Romans as a way to relax and treat their skin. People did the process by submerging themselves in pools or tanks full of small fish, mostly gara rufa, which is also known as docker fish. Getting the pool or tank ready for the treatment was the first step in fish therapy. The temperature and cleanliness of the water were carefully controlled to make sure that everyone was safe and comfortable. Filtration systems were often built into the tanks to keep the water clean. The gara rufa fish were put in the pool once it was ready. These small pond fish are from the Middle East and some parts of Asia. They eat dead skin cells, which makes them stand out. They've evolved their mouths to nibble away at dead and flaky skin without hurting or bothering the person being treated. The person would then put part of their body, usually their feet, in the pool or tank with the fish. The fish would swarm around them as they relaxed in the water because they liked the smell of dead skin cells. The fish would slowly nibble on the skin's rough or calloused spots, getting rid of dead skin cells in the process. People who were bitten by the fish said it felt like their skin was tickling or buzzing. While some people might feel a little weird at first, a lot of people found it to be soothing and peaceful. It felt peaceful because the fish were moving slowly and the water was warm. The gara rufa fish ate dead skin cells, which exfoliated the skin and made it smoother and softer. This process helps the skin look and feel better overall, especially in places like the feet that tend to get dry or rough. After the fish therapy session, people would usually wash off any fish waste that was still on their skin and moisturize it to keep it soft and hydrated. The ancient Romans frequented public baths, some of which had fish-filled pools. These fish, akin to the gara rufa, were believed to cleanse the skin and promote healing. Number 6. Famous horse running the government of Rome. One of the most famous stories about strange things that happened in ancient Rome is about Emperor Caligula's horse, Incitatus. The third Roman ruler was Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known as Caligula. You'll remember Caligula, the third Roman emperor, from number 11 on our countdown. He ruled from 37 AD to 41 AD. He was known for acting strangely, spending a lot of money, and being mean. The story of his horse Incitatus adds to this image. Caligula was supposed to have wanted to make the horse a consul, or governor of Rome. In Roman society, the consul was one of the most important government positions. Along with another governor, the consul was in charge of running the city. If Caligula had had his way, he would have made his horse Incitatus a government official. It is said that Caligula gave Incitatus luxurious rooms fit for a consul. This included a marble stable, a collar with jewels, and even staff to take care of the horse. The marble stable, in particular, stood for the wealth and extravagance of Caligula's rule. Many history sources tell the story of Incitatus, but scholars disagree on whether or not it is true. Some experts say that the stories about Caligula's bad behavior were made up or overstated by authors who wanted to paint him in a bad light. Others say that Caligula may have done some crazy things, but the idea of making a horse a consul was probably more of a joke or a metaphor for his cruel rule than something he meant to do seriously. The story of Incitatus has lived on as a sign of Caligula's strangeness and excess, even if the claims about it aren't true. It shows how far he was willing to go to show how powerful he was and give in to his whims, even if that meant giving a horse political importance. Number 5, the color purple, as expensive as real gold. It's pretty much common knowledge at this point that, like many societies, the Romans were obsessed with class. What many people don't realize is just how obsessed the Romans were. Take the fact that the majority of free Romans were banned from wearing the color purple. In Roman society, the color purple was associated with glory, power, and royalty. As such, the wearing of a purple toga was reserved for only the emperor and other very high-ranking Romans. Why did purple have this reputation? Because it was insanely expensive to produce purple dye, known as Tyrian purple. All the purple dye was sourced from Phoenicia and made from mollusks, a type of shell. To make enough dye for one toga, which required around 4-6 yards of dyed fabric, 10,000 mollusks had to be crushed to produce only 1 gram of dye. This meant that purple dye was worth roughly 3 times as much as gold. In today's dollars, that's over $66,000. The Romans liked to be able to distinguish a person's class just by looking at them. The ban on purple togas is a prime example of Roman sumptuary law. These were laws brought in that banned lower-class Romans from showing off any wealth they might have. In the Roman class system, you stayed in your place, and only the upper classes could flaunt their wealth. Number 4. Your dad would sell you into slavery, but only a couple times. It's no secret that the Romans made extensive use of slaves. Their dominion was established on the backs of their vanquished opponents. Slaves in Rome had no rights and suffered a wretched existence. Roman people were generally free of the risks of slavery, unless they disobeyed the law. However, there was one quite unusual exception. Roman fathers might sell, or rather rent out, their sons into slavery, but only temporarily. The father and the potential buyer would negotiate the price and duration of the son's enslavement. When the term was over, the buyer was supposed to return the son in nearly the same condition in which he had gotten him. The father could only do this in moderation, as was the case in most aspects of Roman culture. He may sell the same child again without any problems. However, if he sold the boy a 3rd time, he would be considered an unfit parent. Any boy who had been sold by his father 3 times was legally emancipated from his selfish parents. The 3 sales rule did, however, apply to each kid. That meant that if a father wanted to continue generating money from his children, all he had to do was produce more of them. Number 3, or your dad could just kill you if he wanted. Ancient Rome was always a patriarchal culture, but in its early days, the Romans went to extremes. In early Rome, a man's family was effectively his property. He had complete control over them, which is why he was able to sell his sons into slavery. It was up to the father to decide how to discipline his children. If he believed his children deserved to die, he could do it without facing legal consequences. Even leaving home could not guarantee his children's safety. Even after marrying off and leaving the nest, a daughter might be killed by her father. Sons were not safe either. They only became genuinely independent after being sold 3 times or after their father died. Eventually, the regulations were loosened. By the 1st century BC, a man's privilege to kill his family had been largely eliminated. However, if a son is convicted of a crime that damages his family reputation, a father may still murder him. Number 2. Christianity or cannibalistic blood cult. While being conquered by the Romans was undoubtedly unpleasant, they were not all horrible conquerors. For example, they often ignored indigenous people's belief systems and allowed these religions to continue unchanged even under their new rule. At most, the Romans had a tendency to incorporate other people's faiths into their own. This explains, for example, why the Roman and Greek pantheons are so similar. So why did the Romans have such a difficult relationship with the Jews and early Christians for so long? Well, part, but not all, of the rationale was that Jewish and Christian behaviors disgusted the Romans. The Romans strongly opposed the Jewish practice of circumcision, seeing it as a terrible kind of genital mutilation. The Romans committed some heinous acts in the name of their gods, but it seems that the small amount of flesh at the apex of the male member was too much for them. Christians, on the other hand, were believed to be cannibalistic as cannibalistic blood cults. The Romans did not understand the metaphor and took the flesh of Christ and blood of Christ, portions of the Holy Communion, too literally. Number 1. The worst execution method ever, involving a rooster. Execution methods in ancient Rome were, in a word, barbaric. The Romans devised several methods for executing criminals and prisoners. They might be thrown off of a great height, their heads might be chopped off, or they might be forced to participate as gladiators in games and displays, to the death. The most severe method of punishment was reserved for individuals who committed the ultimate crime, patricide. Anyone found guilty of killing their parents was given the penalty of the sack. First, the criminal was blinded because they were deemed unworthy of being in the light. They were then marched out of town, straight to the closest huge body of water. They were thrashed with rods until they were almost dead. They were then shackled and placed into a large leather bag with a snake, a dog, a monkey, and a rooster. The whole bag was then dumped into the water, where the person inside either drowned or was slaughtered by the thrashing beasts. Well, that was a wild ride through some seriously strange Roman customs. These were the 15 bizarre things that were considered normal in ancient Rome. Did any of them surprise you? Do let us know in the comments section.